My name was not on the list. Not as a +1. Not as a distant relative they were still deciding about. Not even as a question mark someone had penciled in and then erased. I found out my younger brother was getting married the same way I find out most things about my own family these days from someone else's Instagram story. At 7 in the morning, while my coffee was still brewing, my aunt had posted a video. My brother was in a backyard I didn't recognize, surrounded by string lights and people I'd never met, dropping to one knee in front of a woman named Cassidy Holt. My mother was there, in a yellow dress I'd never seen, pressing both hands to her face and crying happy tears. My father had his arm around another man's wife, laughing at something off camera. Everyone was glowing. Everyone was present. I wasn't. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, listening to the coffee finish dripping. Then I poured myself a cup, added oat milk, and sat at the table like everything was fine, because I had learned, a long time ago, that falling apart was a luxury this family never extended to me. I'm the older one. I'm the steady one. I'm the one who handles it. That was the story they told about me, anyway. The first time I understood the story they were telling, I was 12 years old and my brother had just broken my mother's favorite ceramic bowl, the blue one with the painted birds she'd brought back from a trip before we were born. He knocked it off the shelf, chasing the dog through the living room, and it shattered across the hardwood into maybe 40 pieces. I was in the next room and heard the crash. I walked in, saw his face go white, and before he could say anything, I told him to go upstairs. Then I swept up every shard myself. When my mother came home and asked what happened, I told her it fell. Just fell. She looked at me and said, "You need to be more careful." I nodded and said, "I know. I'm sorry." My brother never thanked me. My parents never asked twice. That was the beginning of an arrangement no one ever officially made. By high school, the arrangement had expanded. I helped my brother through every science class he struggled with, which was all of them. I covered for him when he missed curfew. I wrote the opening paragraphs of his college application essay during a weekend I should have spent studying for my own SATs. He got into a state school that suited him. I got into a program at Georgetown that I paid for mostly on my own, because my parents assumed I would be fine. "You're resourceful," my mother used to say. "You always figure it out." What she meant was, "You don't need us the way he does." What she didn't say, and probably didn't even know she believed, was that his need was precious, and my sufficiency was inconvenient. If I needed something, it disrupted the story. If he needed something, it confirmed it. After college, I built a career in brand strategy, working for a firm in Chicago that helped mid-size companies figure out who they were and how to say it. I was good at it. I was patient, analytical, and I knew how to listen to what people weren't saying. I climbed steadily, made decent money, moved into an apartment I loved on the north side of the city near the lake. I called home every Sunday. I sent birthday cards on time, every year, for everyone. When my parents needed a new HVAC system and my father's work had been slow, I sent them $3,000 in cash and told them not to worry about paying it back. My mother thanked me and mentioned it once. My brother never knew I did it. He was living in Nashville by then, doing some kind of marketing work for a live events company, dating a series of women my parents described using words like bubbly and sweet. They visited him twice a year. They visited me when it was on the way to somewhere else. None of that stopped me from showing up, from calling, from caring. I had made my peace, or something I told myself was peace, with being the quiet leg of the triangle, the one that held everything up but never got a corner of its own. Then came the engagement, and the strategy changed. I texted my brother the morning after I saw my aunt's video. "Congratulations," I said. "I saw Aunt Linda's post. I'm so happy for you." He responded 4 hours later with a single emoji, the party popper one. No call, no explanation for why I hadn't been told, no acknowledgement that I'd found out the same way a stranger would. I texted my mother. She called that evening, sounding slightly breathless, like she'd been hoping I wouldn't bring it up. "Oh, honey, it all happened so fast. We wanted to tell you properly, but you know how these things get away from you." I asked when the engagement had happened. She paused. "About 3 weeks ago," she said. It took me a moment to process that. 3 weeks ago. I said I understood, and I got off the phone. My best friend, Diane, came over that Friday with wine and leftover Thai food and the kind of focused anger on my behalf that I had never quite been able to summon for myself. She sat cross-legged on my couch, picked up her phone, scrolled through my brother's fiancé's Instagram profile without asking permission, and said, "Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of very curated content here, and also, her future mother-in-law follows her, has for years, which means this wasn't exactly a surprise to the family inner circle." I asked Diane what she meant. "She means your family had a plan," Diane said, "and you weren't part of it. Not because they forgot you, because they decided." I've thought about that word a lot since then. Decided. It changes the weight of everything. That was the night I stopped pretending my brother and I had a complicated relationship that simply needed more tending. We had a one-directional relationship that I had been maintaining almost entirely from my side, out of something I now recognized as habit and grief, and the stubborn hope that if I kept showing up, they would eventually notice I'd been there all along. I stopped showing up on Sunday mornings. I stopped sending the cards. I didn't respond the next time my mother forwarded me a group email chain about the upcoming holidays. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't send a message explaining myself. I just quietly, gradually, stopped holding up my corner. The relief was extraordinary. His name is Owen, and I met him at an industry conference in San Francisco 3 years ago during a panel on brand positioning that I was moderating, and he was too polite to walk out of even though it was clearly not the session he'd meant to attend. Afterward, he found me in the hallway and apologized for looking confused for most of it, and I told him it was fine and that he'd asked the best question of the session, which was true. We got coffee. Then dinner. Then we talked until the hotel bar closed and the bartender started stacking chairs around us. Owen runs his own consulting firm, small and deliberately so, 4 people and a philosophy. He grew up in Vermont, has 2 older sisters he adores, and is constitutionally incapable of letting a compliment go unspoken. He tells me I'm sharp and he means it analytically. He tells me I'm beautiful and he means that too. He is the first person in my adult life who has never once made me feel like a burden for having needs. On the Thursday morning when I told him what was happening with my family, really told him all of it, from the bowl I didn't break to the engagement I found out about in a stranger's Instagram story, he listened without interrupting for 45 minutes. When I finished, he didn't offer solutions. He didn't try to explain my family to me or tell me how they probably meant well. He just said, "You've been doing an enormous amount of work for people who have decided that's simply what you do, and you get to decide when to stop." I asked him what he thought I should do. He said he thought I should go somewhere beautiful and stop thinking about it for a while. And then he said, "I've been wanting to ask you something and I keep waiting for the right moment, but I'm starting to think the right moment is the one you make. So, I'd like to do this properly eventually, with a ring and everything. But I want you to know the question before the ceremony of it. Do you want to build something with me? Long-term, permanent, the kind where you never have to explain yourself." I told him yes without hesitating. He smiled and said good. Then he opened his laptop and started looking at Amalfi Coast rentals with the same focused calm he brings to everything. We left on a Tuesday in September. I had cleared my client's schedule for 10 days and told my assistant that I was unreachable except for genuine emergencies, which I defined strictly. I packed lightly 2 pairs of linen trousers, 1 silk blouse I'd owned for years and rarely worn, a sundress, the color of rust that Diane had pressed on me that morning at the airport, with both hands on my shoulders, and a look that said, "Don't you dare pack it in the checked bag." Owen carried his own bag and a beat-up copy of a novel he'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. On the plane, he fell asleep on my shoulder somewhere over the Atlantic, and I stayed awake watching the dark water below us and felt, for the first time in months, like I wasn't waiting for anything. The town clung to the cliffs above the Tyrrhenian Sea like it had decided long ago that falling was not an option. Narrow streets, ceramic tiles, bougainvillea in every color tumbling over white walls. Our rental was a converted stone house at the top of a path that required commitment, steep, uneven steps that wound up through a lemon grove before leveling out at a terrace with a table for 2 and a view that made conversation feel irrelevant. On our second evening, I wore the rust dress. I didn't plan anything. I wasn't thinking about home, or my brother, or the wedding invitation that hadn't arrived and presumably wouldn't. I was thinking about the light, the way it fell over the water in the hour before sunset. Gold going, amber going, something that doesn't have a name. Owen had asked a local photographer to come by, casually, the way he does things. No announcement, no staging, just someone with a camera who would follow us around the terrace and the lemon path and the rooftop where we had discovered a second table we liked even better. She took hundreds of photos. She told us at the end that she'd found what she was looking for in about 20 of them, and could she share one or two through her studio account? Owen looked at me and I said sure. I wasn't thinking about it. The photo she chose was one she'd taken from below the terrace. Looking up, I was standing at the stone railing with my back partly turned, the dress catching the wind, the sea behind me dropping off into distance. I wasn't performing anything. I was just there. Owen had said something that made me laugh and my face was half turned. Mid-moment, not arranged. She tagged me in her post with a line in Italian I had to translate. Some places choose you back. I liked it and went to sleep. I woke up to 47 notifications. The photographer had a following I hadn't thought to check: architects, travel writers, interior design accounts, some kind of Italian lifestyle magazine. The photo had been reshared by a few of them, then a few more, then by an account that aggregated content around the theme of women living intentionally, which had a few 100,000 followers, and a community that apparently responded very specifically to images of women in rust-colored dresses, standing at cliffs with their backs to the camera and their faces towards something unspecified. The caption on the reshare was simple. She chose herself. I put my phone down and went to make coffee. 2 days later, I got a direct message from someone named Paige Hartwell. The name didn't register at first. Then I looked at her profile and understood. Paige was the older sister of Cassidy Holt, the woman my brother was marrying. Her bio said, event planner, based in Nashville, and there were photos of beautifully arranged tables and floral installations that looked expensive. She had clearly been doing her research before messaging me, because she knew who I was before she said hello. She wrote, I saw the photo. I've been following that photographer for years. I didn't realize until I saw your name that you were Marcus's sister. Is everything okay between you two? Cassidy told me you're very private and that there was some distance in the family, but she's been worried about the wedding guest situation. I don't want to pry. I just felt like I should reach out. I read it 3 times. I wrote back one sentence. I appreciate you reaching out. I didn't know about the wedding until I saw my aunt's video 3 weeks after the engagement. Then I put my phone face down again and went back to the terrace with my coffee and let the morning do what it does in a place like that. Arrive slowly, generously, without asking anything in return. Paige replied within the hour. Oh no. What followed, over the next 2 days, was a careful and eventually frank conversation that told me more about the situation than 3 weeks of silence from my own family had. Cassidy, Paige said, was under the impression that I had decided not to be involved, that there had been some kind of falling out that predated the engagement, that I was aware of the relationship but had made it known through channels she didn't quite understand that I preferred to stay distant. Someone had curated a story and handed it to her ready-made, and she had accepted it because she had no reason not to. That someone was not hard to identify. What I didn't know what Paige told me on the 3rd day of our conversation, hesitantly, because she was a decent person navigating something messy, was that Cassidy's family had their own concerns about my brother. Her father was a serious man who had made money in commercial real estate and took commitments literally. He had been quietly asking questions for weeks. Not hostile questions, accountant questions. The kind that began with "Can you walk me through?" and ended with "I'd like to see documentation." My brother, as it turned out, had given Cassidy's father the impression that our family had a certain kind of standing. Nothing fabricated outright, just an inflated suggestion, the kind you can make by omitting things, by letting assumptions breathe without correcting them, by describing your sister's career in general terms that make it sound like a family operation rather than a thing she built alone while you were not paying attention. Cassidy's father had started asking about the sister, and then the photo had appeared. And the woman in the photo did not look like a person who had stepped away from a family operation. She looked like a person who had stepped away from something else entirely. I didn't post anything else. I didn't add context or a caption or a story that explained what was in the photo. I just let it be what it was, a woman on a terrace in September, choosing where to stand. Owen and I drove along the coast on a Friday and had lunch at a restaurant where the pasta was made that morning, and the owner's grandmother sat near the window, doing something with her hands that looked like prayer, but might have been knitting. Owen told me about a project his firm was considering, a small nonprofit he wanted to take on pro bono. I told him I thought he should. He said he'd been thinking about restructuring the company to make space for more of that kind of work, and asked what I thought. We talked about it for 2 hours. On the way back, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I let it ring. She called again the next morning. I answered. She started in the middle, not hello, not how are you, but something that arrived like a sentence that had been sitting in her chest for several days already. I don't know what you're doing, but your brother is upset, and Cassidy's father is asking questions that I don't know how to answer. And this photo. I said, what about it? You're everywhere, she said. All these people sharing it, and now Cassidy's family thinks something's wrong. I said, is something wrong? She didn't answer right away. I said, I found out he was engaged from Aunt Linda's video, 3 weeks after it happened. I texted him and he sent me an emoji. I asked you and you said it got away from you. So, I'd genuinely like to understand, what story have you been telling them about me? The silence had a particular texture, the kind that's not empty but full of things being decided. She said, we just didn't want complications. I said, I'm your daughter. She said, you've always been so independent. I had heard those words my entire life, and they had always sounded like praise. Standing there in the lemon grove, phone pressed to my ear, ocean somewhere below, I finally heard what they actually were. They were permission they had given themselves. They had decided that my independence was a natural fact, something I'd been born with, like height or a tolerance for cold, and that it absolved them of the work of including me. If I could handle anything, they never had to ask how I was doing. If I was strong, they never had to worry about me. If I was self-sufficient, they could put all of their attention on the one who needed it and call that love. I said, that's not the same as not needing people. She said she was sorry I felt that way. That phrase, that extraordinary evasion. I said, okay, and I got off the phone, and I sat down on a stone step in the lemon grove and let myself be very still for a long time. Owen found me there. He didn't ask what happened. He sat beside me on the step, arms resting on his knees, face toward the water, and after a few minutes he said, you know what I keep thinking? You spent 30 years making yourself easy to leave out, not because you did anything wrong, because they taught you that was the role and you were good at it. You don't have to be good at it anymore. That was the moment something in me finished grieving. Not loudly, not with ceremony. Just a quiet, internal settling, the way a door finally stops rattling when someone has the sense to close it all the way. We flew home on a Sunday. I went back to work on Monday, took 3 client meetings, sent a proposal I'd been sitting on, and had dinner with Diane, who made me describe the Amalfi House in unnecessary detail and then said, okay, but what about the photo? And I told her about Paige, and Cassidy's father, and my mother's phone call. Diane listened with her chin in her hand and then said, you didn't do anything. You just existed visibly. That's it. That's all it was. The call I had been waiting for, the one I had, if I was honest, been partly dreading and partly needing, came on a Tuesday night at 10:15. I was reading in bed. Owen was on a call with a client in London. I saw my brother's name on the screen, and something in my chest did the small, familiar contraction it always did when he called. Even now, even after everything. The part of me that was still 12 years old, sweeping up ceramic shards, hoping that this time he would say, thank you. I answered. His voice was tight in a way I recognized. Not grief, not remorse, damage control. He said, Cassidy's dad is pulling back from the venue deposit and I need you to tell him we're fine. I said, are we? He said, you know what I mean. I said, I don't, actually. You announced your engagement 3 weeks before telling me. You didn't invite me to anything. And when I found out, you sent a party popper emoji. So I need you to tell me what fine means to you. He said, I don't know why you're making this into something. I said, I'm not making it into anything. I'm just not making it smaller. That's new. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that was slightly softer, slightly more like the boy I had actually loved, he said, Cassidy's been asking about you. She says she felt like she was lied to about who you are. I said, she was. He didn't respond. I said, I'm not angry at her. I want to be clear about that. She didn't know. Whoever told her I was out of the picture, that wasn't her decision to make. He said, I didn't think you wanted to be involved. I said, you didn't think because it was more convenient not to. If I was out of the picture, you got to describe your family however you wanted. You got to be the one with the successful trajectory. No complicated sister. No one around who remembers what it actually cost to get here. I was the safety net for 20 years, and the moment you didn't need one anymore, you decided I didn't exist. He was very quiet now. I said, I don't hate you. I want you to hear that clearly. But I spent a long time making myself small enough to fit into the space your family left for me. And I'm not doing that anymore. He said, what does that mean for the wedding? I said, I haven't received an invitation. If I receive one, I'll consider it. He said, that's not an answer. I said, it's the honest one. And then I told him I hoped things worked out with Cassidy's family. And I meant it. And I said goodnight. I put the phone on the nightstand and lay back and stared at the ceiling. Owen came in 20 minutes later, loosening his tie, and sat on the edge of the bed. I told him what happened. He listened. Then he said, you know what I noticed? You didn't cry. I thought about it. He was right. A month later, I gave notice at the firm. Not impulsively, I'd been planning it for 2 years, quietly, the way I do most things. I had savings, a business plan, and 2 clients who had already told me they'd follow me if I went independent. I registered a company called Clearline Strategy and set up an office in my apartment until I found something I liked better. Within 6 weeks, I had 4 clients, a 5th in conversation, and more hours in my day than I'd had in a decade. Cassidy's sister, Paige, and I kept talking. It turned into something more than the information exchange it started, as she was funny and direct and had strong opinions about event design and the limitations of peonies as a centerpiece flower, which she explained at length in a way that was oddly compelling. She told me eventually that Cassidy had confronted my brother about what she'd been told, that there had been several difficult conversations, that her father had reinstated the venue deposit after meeting my brother and deciding he was, in Paige's words, a work in progress, but a willing one. She said Cassidy was hoping to meet me. I told her I was open to that. We met for lunch at a place near the river in Chicago. Just the 2 of us. Cassidy was quieter than her Instagram suggested, thoughtful, a little anxious, someone who was clearly trying to do the right thing and wasn't entirely sure what it was. She apologized, sincerely, for accepting a version of me that had been handed to her without question. I told her I didn't blame her, and I meant it. She said she wanted to start over if I was willing. I said I was willing to try. I didn't tell her everything. Some things weren't hers to hold yet. But I told her enough that I loved my brother in the way you love someone you grew up alongside, even when the growing up wasn't easy, even when the history is complicated and the repairs haven't started yet. That I wanted him to have something real, with someone who saw him clearly. That I hoped she was that person. She cried a little. I handed her a napkin from the holder on the table and told her the pasta here was very good and she should have some. The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks later. It was addressed to me and Owen both. I sat with it for a long time before saying anything. Owen found it on the kitchen table that evening, read it, and looked at me with his particular expression. The one that means, I will follow your lead on this completely. I said, I think I want to go. He said, then we'll go. I said, not because I've forgiven everything, because I'm not finished being his sister. Those are different things. He said, I know. That's why I think you should. There is an image that a friend of Paige's took at the wedding reception, not a professional. Just someone with a good eye and a camera phone who happened to be standing near the garden wall when my brother found me between the ceremony and the dinner and put his arms around me in a hug that lasted longer than I expected. My face is visible over his shoulder. I'm not smiling exactly. I'm just present. Eyes open, chin up, one hand on his back. Paige sent it to me the morning after. She said, I think you should have this. I looked at it for a long time. Then I saved it to my phone. to the folder I keep for things that feel true. I didn't post it. Some things don't belong to the internet. Some things are just for you. A record of a moment you survived, and then chose to stay in anyway. Not because it was comfortable, and not because it was resolved, but because you finally understood that belonging somewhere wasn't a gift someone else could give you or take away. It was a decision, made quietly, alone, in the space between what happened and what you do next. The road back is not a single step. I know that. Some weeks my brother calls, and it's easy. And some weeks I still hear the party popper emoji in everything he says, and have to remind myself that people are allowed to be worse than they were, and then better again. My mother and I talk, carefully, in a register that is polite and sometimes warm and occasionally real. My father and I have always understood each other better than either of us admitted. We had dinner, just the two of us, in February, and he told me he was proud of what I had built. It was the first time he had said it. I thanked him and we both looked at the table for a moment, and that was enough. Owen and I got properly engaged in the spring ring, kneeling, the whole ceremony of it. In the kitchen of a house in Vermont we had spent 3 weekends looking at before admitting we both already wanted it. His sisters called within the hour. They had known he was going to do it. They had been waiting. I called my mother afterward. She cried good tears, the real kind, and said she wanted to be part of whatever came next. I said she could be. I meant it. There is a version of this story where I stayed quiet, kept showing up, kept making myself easy to leave out, and slowly disappeared from my own life, the way things disappear when no one is looking, not dramatically, just gradually, through accumulation of small absences. I was close to that version for a long time, closer than I like to think about. But there is also this version. The one where I stood at a railing above the sea in a rust-colored dress I almost didn't pack, and someone happened to be looking up, and the image of a woman who was simply, finally, fully present found its way to people who needed to see it. I did not plan any of what followed. I did not set anything in motion. I only stopped making myself invisible and let what was already true come forward. That's all it ever takes. That's all it takes.